As of now, our country heavily relies on oil, a fossil resource that will eventually be depleted from its dwindling reserves. In order to save the environment from further degradation and prepare our nation for a future devoid of this resource, other sources of renewable energy must be pursued. In order to evaluate the place of oil in society today, we need to consider its history over the past century. Oil first came into play in the late 19th century with the arrival of Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. Rockefeller's astute business practices propelled the company forward and made the resource a common commodity. Most notable were his methods of horizontal integration, which enabled him to organize a monopoly over the entire oil industry. Their introduction of trusts and practices like interlocking directorates either drove competition into bankruptcy or brought competition under the company's name. As a result of this system, oil's role in the U.S. economy rose swiftly through the 20th century and only became more integral to the society with the advent of technologies like the gas-guzzling automobile.
Over the course of the 20th century, our nation became increasingly dependent on oil from the Middle East as domestic supplies decreased. This reliance, which continues to an extent today, became unfavorable for various reasons. Chief among them were the oil shocks afflicting our nation. For example, we faced one of our biggest oil crises following the Six-Day War after U.S.-backed Israel fought against Syria and Egypt. Under the pressure of Arab nations, OPEC, or Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, imposed a retaliatory oil embargo on the U.S., thrusting our nation into an oil shock. The situation was dire enough that Congress even passed measures creating 55-mile-per-hour speed limits on highways. In 1974, OPEC did lift its embargo, but only after quadrupling the price. As we can see, oil places our country in a precarious position since 60% of our oil supply comes from foreign countries, effectively limiting our economic autonomy. Even today, our government diverts funds away from pressing areas like education and healthcare to subsidize oil, and with the global supply of oil decreasing, our dependence on the resource will only spawn global tensions and other large-scale problems worse than the ones we've seen before. Geologists as early as 1956 showed mathematically that exploitation of oil fields follows a predictable bell curve trend, which is slow to take off, rises steeply, flattens, and then descends again steeply. At this time, the United States has temporarily averted its descent down the steep decline by finding new reserves, but the country will sooner or later continue the decline. Other quantitative data show that global oil production can be expected to decline 2 to 3% here on out every year as well. Many countries such as Russia and the US have already hit peak oil, which is the point after which oil availability and consumption drastically decrease.
The point is, the United States has become dependent on non-renewable energy since oil's debut in the late 19th century, and since then, been partially subject to the influence of foreign countries. Perhaps even more concerning is the negative environmental effects associated with oil. The carbon emissions produced by the combustion of hydrocarbons in the oil are released into the atmosphere. These emissions increase the global concentration of greenhouse gases, which exacerbate global warming by increasing the amount of infrared heat retained by our planet's atmosphere. If this global warming follows the current trends, we will see tremendous decreases in biodiversity, large-scale increases in famine, and growing outbreaks of disease. In addition to the harmful effects of carbon emissions, the process of fracking is very detrimental to local environments. Fracking involves drilling down into the earth and tapping into oil fields and natural gas reserves by pumping water and other chemicals into the ground. Though this process has high yields and energy-rich resources, it contaminates groundwater resources crucial to local water supply and induces small-scale earthquakes. Simply trying to mitigate the effects of fracking and, more importantly, global warming will cause global economies to suffer trillions, as maintaining the environment is a monumental effort. It really is worthwhile to transition towards renewable energy now. In fact, it is already within our grasp. There are numerous types of renewable resources we can explore currently. Solar, wind, water-driven, geothermal are just a few. All these types are renewable resources, unlike oil, which takes lifespans of time to form. Of these, the most viable solutions are solar, through photovoltaic cells, and wind, harnessed by wind turbines due to the high energy return that is gained. Oil is one of the most relied resources of our time, but it has to be understood that this resource will not last us for much longer. History has shown us that even with a large global supply, oil is an unreliable energy source and will only become more so as we delve into the modern era. The detrimental environmental effects that oil usage brings are just as significant and offer a compelling case for us to switch towards other forms of energy.